like just cloth masks. But even through that, I could tell just by the look in the eyes that one of the guys that was in the room was the surgeon. What was great is that moment when we made eye contact, all that anxiety and fear just washed away. Because I knew I was f***ed. It was August 1998. I'd been there initially to study. I was there living and working. Went to lunch at noon, and about 2 hours later, I was doubled over, couldn't stand up. Went home, and by about midnight, I just couldn't stand the pain anymore. The stomach ache, and I called the American Medical Center, which was a partnership between the British, Canadian, and U.S. embassies, where they had English-speaking nurses available for people with colds or minor issues. We had a membership. So I called them at midnight, and they said, nobody's going to be in that can see you until 6 a.m. So if you come in at 6, we'll get you in first. So I was there at 5, waiting, and I was sitting next to a lady who showed up at 5:59, who had the sniffles, who asked if she could go first. And as I'm doubled over, I was like,
You let her?
No.
You didn't let her?
No.
She had the sniffles.
She had the sniffles. So I finally went in, explained what had happened, and we came to the conclusion that I, probably had food poisoning. They gave me a shot with pain medication and an IV drip, and I passed out, slept for about 3 or 4 hours, woke up, and they were like, head home. Went home, and by about 4 o'clock that afternoon, the pain came back, and went back, and by now we had gotten human resources, our human resource department in Houston involved, and coworkers, and everybody was there trying to figure out what the next step was. And we had insurance that would medical evac us out of the country if there was a major problem. And the destinations that were from Moscow were normally Helsinki or Vienna, and I wanted to get the hell out of there. I did not want them to do it. And they said, look, it's a minor operation, just have it done here. And it was at about that point where they're trying to determine whether or not it was an appendix. And they said, well, if the pain comes back, then we'll know it's an appendix. And I was up on my knees, and I said, the pain is back, and I'm not letting these idiots touch me. About 6 months before, a guy that I knew that was the head of representation for BASF had tried to medical evac. He was in his 60s, and his appendix had ruptured in flight and died. They said, if you try and fly with this, if the appendix ruptures, you can die. So let's go ahead and do this. So after they kept from me that my secretary, Ludmila Kataeva, had to go pick up supplies, they also kept from me that we had to bribe them $500 to do the procedure. And by now it's midnight. And so everybody was gone. No foreigners can perform surgery in Russia unless they're licensed in Russia. So at this point, it's all Russian. And my Russian was pretty good. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 9, only because my accent, being from the Midwest, made it sound like I was German speaking Russian. But all the questions were in Russian, and the one where I really started to get scared was a nurse asked me something about blood, krov, and I was like, look, I think I know what you mean, but unless you can explain it to me, I don't want to answer it. And she said, это не важно, which means it's not important. And I knew it was a question about blood. It's just blood. And so I was sitting there at that point, butt naked in a wicker wheelchair, like that one where Philip Seymour Hoffman was wheeled down on fire, Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
And it didn't work out so good for Philip Seymour Hoffman's character.
And that's what was going through your head.
Some of the tests, one of the tests, they clamped like jumper cables to my wrists and ankles. And it went to a machine that kicked out a little strip of like adding machine paper with holes punched in it. And then they went over and ripped it off and looked at the holes, hanging chads, and like, harumph, 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 and then left. And I'm like, this is it. And they wheel me down this hallway, and we turn left into the operating room, which was like a meat locker. It was just, if I was standing, you could reach the ceiling, and it was just white and blue mosaic tiles on the floor, walls, and ceiling. no doctor lights, just like regular fluorescent lights,
Right.
just over the operating table, which I shit you not, was a 2x12 crucifix, complete with leather straps and buckles that my naked, sad ass had to climb up on. And as they strapped my wrists and ankles down, I'm not a religious man, but I did say my goodbyes and thanked my parents and the people that I cared about, but I figured that was it. And as I was sitting there, the surgical team kind of came around me and they shut the thud of the operating room. And I looked up and they had these goofy stovetop hats with like just cloth masks. But even through that, I could tell just by the look in the eyes that one of the guys that was in the room was the surgeon, clearly in charge, and he had been in the examination room when I was on my knees, and I called them all idiots. And what was great is that moment when we made eye contact, all that anxiety and fear just washed away, because I knew I was and I don't know how long the operation lasted, but I started coming out of the fog of anesthesia on a sweating cotton mouth on a plastic mattress with itchy wool blanket on top of me. And then as I started coming around, I realized that I had a gauze diaper on with 2 tubes coming out of my abdomen in a room with no windows and one shitty light cockeyed on the wall in like a broom closet. And so I'm sitting there and I start panicking. Like, why?
It sounds like Guantanamo Bay.
I started screaming for help at the top of my lungs. Like, minutes felt like hours and seconds, like days. I was beyond panic. And this ornery babushka, I woke her up and she comes down and opens the door to my hole. And she looks in and she's like, "Stow!" Which means what? And I was like, "Tubes. Nobody said anything about tubes. Why do I have tubes?" And she's like, "Oh." Slammed the door and I started screaming again. She came back and she's like, "What?" And I go, Can I please have something to drink?" She was like, "No." Can I just have some water to rinse my mouth out and spit?" And she was like, "No." And I said, "Can I sit up?" She was like, "No, you have to lay flat." And I said, "For how long?" And she said, "For 2 weeks." And then she shut the door. And then all that panic and fear and I just sat there and waited for what I guess was about 6 a.m. when they finally let 2 of my coworkers come in who were going to cheer me up. Who were going to come in and like, wee, and hey, and they came in, and I made it perfectly clear that they needed me to get me the out of there right now. Get me the out of here. I'm not staying here. And they got on the phone with HR, and my appendix had ruptured, and which is why the gauze, the diaper, and the tubes. And insurance covered the medical flight to Helsinki because of the risk of peritonitis. And at the Kremlin Hospital, they didn't have 24-hour lab service. So the real risk of peritonitis, the insurance company put the bill for getting me out of the air, which was that in and of just the trip to get from the room outside was a nightmare. I got back in that shitty wicker wheelchair, and then because the elevator,
still wearing the diaper?
Still had the diaper, and they just cut the tubes and taped them to my chest, and I'm sitting there naked with a towel in my diaper, and wheeled me out, and then I had to transition from that to a cot, like from MASH, and then they put me in a van, not an ambulance, a vambulance, just a van, and then they drove me out to Domodedova, the military airport, not the fancy Sheremetyevo one where the roof is made out of shell casings, creepy place. And then, so we were driving in the median all the way out to Domodedova, and we get out there, and still a friend of mine, David Broughton, was with me, and he had my passport and he had all the information and shit, but they still had to check inside my diaper to make sure I wasn't smuggling Russian artwork. I don't know what they thought was in my ass, but so I had to roll over and they had to check inside my diaper just to make sure this whole this whole operation wasn't some farce to get a Fabergé egg out.
You know,
I don't know what they thought was going to be in that diaper.
They are very careful.
Very
They're
careful.
Very thorough.
Oh,
very
that
thorough.
you can't get anything by them.
No, you can't. Well, let's take a drink to your amazing surgery in Russia, because I think you probably need a double for that.
Yeah. Here's to hopefully an improved form of socialized
An
medicine.
improved form of socialized medicine.